Hello there. I'm going to introduce you to some of the basic techniques we're going to be using in the prokaryotes lab. So as we do this, we're going to be making use of the Bunsen burner, and we're going to be making use of a process called aseptic technique. So when we use our Bunsen burner, we'll get one of the Bunsen burners out from our desk. We'll plug it into the gas jet, grab a lighter, turn. When we turn the gas on, we'll have a match, or the lighter, we're going to bring it up along the barrel of the burner. So as we go, we'll turn the gas on, bring it up the side, and we have our flame. Now this is a good flame. We see here, when we see a good flame, what we should see is that we've got a bright blue inner cone and then a darker blue outer cone. The hottest part of this flame is just above the top of the inner blue cone. So when we want to sterilize our loops, we want to place that loop just above that inner blue cone. Inside the center of the inner blue cone, it is not hot. So you'll see that inside, I've got my loop here, inside the cone, and it is not heating up at this point. So when we flame sterilize our loops, we'll start near the top of the flame, typically at an angle. We're going to go at an angle down and then pull back, and our loop has been sterilized. Now something I do want to point out, if you come to your desk and you turn on your gas and your flame, let's see here, your flame may look like this. Okay, we don't have that inner blue cone. What you need to do is open up the barrel, unscrew this, so that you get that inner blue cone. Now, one of the key things we want to do is we want to practice not contaminating our cultures. Again, just to reiterate, when we sterilize our loops, we start at the top of the inner blue cone, go down at an angle slowly, flame the entire wire, and then go back so that it is all glowing. When it's glowing, the whole length of it has glowed, we know that it is considered to be sterile. Now, one of the techniques we're going to use is a technique called a streak plate. So when we have our bacterial cultures, oftentimes we want to get them out into individual colonies. And you'll be practicing this technique. There's a couple of ways to do this. One of the easy ways is to take a piece of paper towel and then just kind of outline the circle of your Petri dish on that. So I've got an outline of my Petri dish. I'm also going to draw a line here on my drawing, and then I'm going to draw a line here on my Petri dish, so I make sure that those line up when I put my Petri dish on my template. Now we're going to separate this Petri dish into various quadrants for separating. So I'm going to first draw a line here, then another line, and another line. So it's going to appear something like this. Now when I actually go to streak, this is going to be quadrant number 1 right here. This is quadrant number 2 at the top, number 3 on the right hand side, and number 4 at the bottom. So the way this will work, let me put my Petri dish on my template here. Again, I want to make sure my loop is sterile. You notice I've gone over this a couple of times. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Say no more, say no more. Hopefully you get the idea that this is an important process, because we don't want to be introducing foreign bacteria into our culture. We'll then take our culture to get our bacteria. One of the things we have to realize is that there are bacteria all around us. There are bacteria in the air, on our skin. I'd say when we're breathing, we're exhaling, but hopefully we've got our masks on here. So what we want to do when we open this up, we just want to open this Petri dish a crack. We don't want to lift the lid all the way off because that will introduce contamination. I'm going to take my loop in. I want to make sure I give it a count to 10 at least, so it's no longer too hot. If I take it right out of the flame and go to get my bacteria, we're going to cook them, and that won't work well at all. So I'm going to take a little scoop of bacteria out here. Now I'm going to show you just a short little picture here in a moment of where you should try to get those bacteria, and that will help you make a good selection here. When selecting colonies off of a Petri dish, we want to be careful about where we collect the bacteria from. So if we collect it from where there's the greatest amount of growth, realize that is the oldest growth. And so those bacteria will actually, in the center of this area where the bacteria have been growing the most, they've been competing for nutrients. You'll actually start to have a lot of bacterial death, and they'll be competing actually for nutrients and actually limited for nutrients, so you won't get the best bacteria. You'll have a higher risk of mutations in this area as well. So when we collect bacteria from a Petri dish, ideally we want to collect from individual colonies. And if it's a large colony, from the margins of the colony. So you just take your loop and scrap up or take up that little bit of bacteria off the surface of the Petri dish. You don't want to chunk out the agar. You just want to scrape the bacteria off of the surface gently. Alternatively, if you cannot access individual colonies, right from the margins of where we have streaks going on. So that would be our secondary choice, from the edges. Don't take a swipe all the way across, because again, you're going to be getting some of those older bacteria which won't have the typical characteristics that we'd be looking for. Okay, now when I streak my plate, over here is where I have quadrant 1. I'm going to take my bacteria, and now that I've got them from the plate, I'll go back, get my little loop full of bacteria and my sterile loop. Now I'm going to lift my lid up just a little bit, and I'm going to streak this all back and forth in the quadrant 1 area. And what I'm doing is I'm diluting the bacteria. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to reflame my loop. Stimulating, isn't it? Now I want to wait at least a count of 10 so that my loop cools down enough so that I don't cook my bacteria. Now when I do quadrant 2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in this area where 1 and 2 overlap, because I want to make sure I drag some of the bacteria from quadrant 1 throughout quadrant 2 here. Okay? Notice I'm no longer getting any more bacteria. I'm just trying to dilute my bacteria. So at this point, I just take my lid, lift it up a little bit, start over here in quadrant 1 area, drag my loop back and forth. Maybe I could do it twice just to make sure I got everything. There we go. I've just streaked quadrant 2. Again, I sterilize my loop. There we go. This time I want to do quadrant 3. So I want to see where quadrant 2 and 3 overlap. And I'm going to go there, and I'm going to drag some of the bacteria from there into quadrant 3. You got to make sure you overlap your streaks from quadrant 2. Otherwise, you won't dilute the bacteria. Finally, one last time, flame my loop. Count to 10. Now this time I'm going to drag from quadrant 3 to quadrant 4. So I drag from 3 to 4, and then just spread it out in 4. And I can even do that a second time just to be safe. Lastly, I want to make sure I do not contaminate myself. So I start here, flaming my loop. And I now have a streaked plate. When I label my plate, I always want to label it on the bottom of the plate. The reason is that if the plate and lid get separated, say I drop some plates, I always know what was in this plate. So always label on the bottom. When we store our Petri dishes, we store them upside down. The reason for this is so that condensation, the agar that's in here, is a nutrient source for the bacteria. When it condenses, it'll condense at the lid, or the top side, and it'll be reabsorbed into the media, and your media won't dry out. The other thing is if you store it with the lid side up, the droplets can fall down into the media and spread the bacteria. If you have any contamination in there, it'll spread the contamination and ruin the entire plate. Now, one other type of inoculation we will be doing is to inoculate these Durham tubes. So when we inoculate a tube, again, we're going to flame sterilize our loop. I'm going to then get some of my bacteria out. Oh, let me wait 10 here so this cools down. Collect a sample of the bacteria. Now, what I want to do is take my test tube. I'm going to grab onto the lid with my pinky and turn the test tube. I'm going to hold the test tube at an angle and just for about a count of 5 seconds run that through the flame while I'm twisting it to kill off any microbes that might be at the top here. Now I'm going to insert the wire part that I flamed into the Durham tube, into the liquid, and then I'm going to swirl it around to get the bacteria off of the loop. Lastly, I'm going to give this one quick flame and then put my lid back on. Now it's important to realize when we put the lid back on, we don't want the lid tight. We want to leave the lid loose so that air can move in and out. So if this is an aerobic bacteria, a bacteria that requires oxygen, it can have that gas exchange going on. The oxygen can move in and out. Okay. Now, in my loop, might have some water in it. When I reflame this, I'm going to start way up high to allow that water to evaporate off. If I take that water and put it right at the very bottom, where it's the hottest, that droplet of water will boil, and it will spread aerosols, contaminating not only my workspace, but also potentially me. So I start at the top. Now it's glowing. I go down, and I will reflame the length here. I can then set this down. I'm done with my flame. I can then shut off my flame, and I'm all set. So that's basically how we streak agar media. Keep in mind this agar media is a food source for the bacteria. And you want to be careful that it has the consistency of Jell-O. So you don't want to be pushing the loop really hard on the surface. You want to gently go over the surface. Okay? So that will get you started. And I'll do a short video also on how to set up our slides for staining the bacteria as well.